Yellowstone National Park was established on the 1st of March, 1872 by President Ulysses Grant. The park was introduced into the Yellowstone Valley of Wyoming and Montana and was meant to shelter the area's wildlife from humans and to be a place of enjoyment for the American people. Yellowstone was the first national park and started a movement which has led to today's nearly 1,200 national parks in some 100 countries around the world. A hunting ban was put into effect in 1883 by the Secretary of the Interior to protect the wildlife of Yellowstone National Park. Though this ban was meant to be of the benefit to all animals in the greater Yellowstone area, it did not apply to predators. The detriment of this became apparent soon, as wolf, fox, coyote, and other predator populations continually plummeted due to hunting. During this downfall, control of Yellowstone was handed over to the military. This took place in 1886. Not long after this, Captain Moose Harris banned all public hunting within the borders of Yellowstone National Park. However, this did not stop the military from hunting down and killing predators themselves. This was deemed the Predator Control Program. Hundreds of wolves were killed during the late 1800s and early 1900s under the law of this program, and though all predators in Yellowstone were hunted, only the wolf was completely eradicated from the area. In 1885, the Division of Economic Ornithology and Mammalogy, later known as the U.S. Biological Survey, was created by Congress. The corporation created the Animal Damage Control Act of 1907 after much pressure from livestock and cattle industries. This added to the destruction of wild wolf populations in the greater Yellowstone area. In 1916, the National Park Service was founded, which slowed the detriment of the wolf population considerably, but not in time to keep the wolves' natural population stable. 10 years later, in 1926, the last sustained gray wolf packs faded out of existence in the greater Yellowstone area. The last wolves to be found and killed were a litter of 8 pups. Though there were hundreds of non-confirmed wolf sightings in the next 50 years, it is generally believed that all sustained packs were either killed or driven out of the area by 1926. In 1933, the predator control programs that contributed to the eradication of wolves in Yellowstone were eliminated. Within the next few years, elk populations began to skyrocket. Elk control began and the hunting of these animals was encouraged. The regulation of this species was given up 30 years later. In 1940 and 1941, soon after the United States Fish and Wildlife Service was founded, Adolph Murray published 2 works that urged wolf reintroduction plans. These were The Ecology of the Coyote in Yellowstone National Park and The Wolves of Mount McKinley. Murray was the first biologist to study wolves in their natural habitat. He worked and pioneered research on wild predators in Alaska. The last wolf to be killed in Yellowstone preceding the hunting laws of today was shot in May of 1943. Now, the idea of wolf reintroduction was beginning to become more popular with scientists, political figures, and most importantly, the American people. In 1944, renowned author, philosopher, and scientist Aldo Leopold reviewed the book The Wolves of North America, in which he commented on wolf reintroduction measures. There still remains some areas of considerable size in which we feel that both red and gray wolves may be allowed to continue their existence with little molestation. Where are these areas? Probably every reasonable ecologist will agree that some of them should lie in the larger national parks and wilderness areas, for instance, Yellowstone. Why, in the necessary process of extirpating wolves from livestock ranges of Wyoming and Montana, were not some of the uninjured animals used to restock Yellowstone? 25 years later, wolves were listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. In 1969, Robert Payne introduced the concept of the keystone species. A keystone species is a species that is highly important to an ecosystem and which removal would cause dramatic downfall or even destruction to the ecosystem. The wolves of Yellowstone soon proved to be one of these keystone species. When the wolves were eradicated, the herds of deer and other game soon realized that they would no longer need to migrate to protect themselves. This caused them to eat more of specific willow stands. Others grew out of control. Small rodents, reptiles, and other animals that called the plants home were now threatened. The roots of the plants also became less healthy, so the ground around them began to erode into the river faster. Now beavers and fish had to struggle to find food and shelter, and their populations dropped rapidly. Because of this, Reintroduction plans for the wolves of Yellowstone really began in the early 1970s. With the Endangered Species Act of 1973, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service was forced to create reintroduction plans for all species that were listed as endangered. This included the gray wolf. By 1980, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service had finished their first gray wolf recovery plan. It gained very little support and even saw backlash from those who did not want wolves back in the greater Yellowstone area.
We should not conduct this type of experiment in Yellowstone Park, Ted. One day wolf reintroduction may well be in the cards, but this concerted howl for wolves, however well-intended, is plain wrong, Ted.
Yellowstone is one of our greatest national parks, Al, and the restoration plan would be one of our greatest environmental successes.
Several years later, in 1987, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service published the Northern Rocky Mountain Wolf Recovery Plan. This plan was a roadmap to reintroducing wolves not only in Yellowstone National Park, but also to the surrounding areas of the Rocky Mountain Range. With this plan gaining popularity, Congress prompted the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to create an environmental impact statement for the recovery plan in 1991. This would describe the expected impacts on the environment when wolves were returned to their natural range. It also showed ways to mitigate impacts. On April 14, 1994, the complete environmental impact statement was published by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. They were then given the go-ahead by Congress to proceed with the first steps of the recovery plan. However, the plan faced opposition from the Sierra Club, an American environmental organization, the National Audubon Society, another nonprofit environmental protection organization, and the farm bureaus of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Many cattle ranchers also disapproved of the reintroduction, arguing that the presence of wolves would put their livestock at danger.
A wolf is a predator, and he's going to take whatever he can to fulfill that need to be a predator. And sometimes he's going to take the easier animals to cross, like the domestic livestock and things like that. And that interferes with a rancher's livelihood when they do that.
Despite the disagreements, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service continued with the recovery plan. The first step was to capture the wolves that would be reintroduced into Yellowstone. 14 wolves were captured in British Columbia and Alberta, Canada, to serve as the first wolves of the reintroduction. These wolves are split in roughly half, and the first shipment arrived in Yellowstone National Park on January 20, 1995. These 8 wolves were released into 3 acclimation pens in the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone National Park, the Crystal Creek, Rose Creek, and Soda Butte Creek pens. The other 6 wolves arrived in Yellowstone 8 days later and were released into the same acclimation pens as the other wolves. The pens were opened in March, and all of the wolves left the pens by the end of the month. By the end of 1995, there were 3 packs of 21 wolves in the national park. In January of the next year, 17 more wolves were captured from the wilderness of Canada. These new captures were released into 4 new acclimation pens before being let loose into the park itself. When the wolves came back, the trophic cascade began to reverse, starting with the deer finding that they again needed to stay on the move. The willow stands had time to recover, smaller species began to return to the forests and plains, and the river banks got firmer. Beavers could now build their dams, and the fish could hide in pools of still water provided by the roots of the trees. In 1998, the number of wolves in Yellowstone National Park surpassed 100. The ultimate goal was achieved in 2009 when the Northern Rocky Mountain distinct population of wolves was changed from endangered to experimental population non-essential. The Yellowstone Wolf Project will continue to be a year-round, demanding process, costly in time and money. Biologists and field staff will continue to capture and collar wolves, research mortality and birth rates, and log numbers. Interactions between wolves, their prey species, hunters, and ranchers will be an ongoing study. Donations from the public have and will continue to be essential for the future success of the Yellowstone Wolf Project. In the course of less than a century, the gray wolf has gone from being one of America's most hated and hunted animals to becoming a source of inspiration and a sign of resilience and prosperity in the eyes of the American people.